All right, you guys, we're going to do things not a little differently, but we're going to talk about three different articulations today, because in my opinion, it's easier to look at them separately, establish where they are, what they do and what they don't do, and then we can start developing these illusions that are found up here. Remember, upper extremity, a lot more mobility, a lot more function. Lower extremity, move me around. So there are a lot more things happening up here for dexterity reasons, writing, working, functioning, little intricate little things that we need to have more of an appreciation for inside the skin, how the bones move about so that we can apply it in our own different fields of kinesiology, okay? Remember, all this information in terms of a general description is in your PDF materials, okay? So I might be skipping around. But from past classes, to me, it's always better to kind of introduce these three different things separately, establish what they do and what they don't do, and then we can develop the motions, the illusions. So wrist, elbow, radial, ulnar. The first thing I'd like for you guys to do, I always like to do these kind of little side experiments. If you put your forearm up against your body, and only try to twist your wrist. Notice how your wrist itself doesn't rotate. It does this and it does this, but it doesn't move in its transverse plane. You have to move your forearm to go in the transverse plane. Notice, if this was happening in the wrist, you wouldn't see my clothing move here. Does that make sense? So one of the things you're going to hear me say a lot is the wrist doesn't twist. The wrist does not twist. When we talk about moving our wrist, that's not our wrist. That I'm going to teach you, that's our radial ulnar joint. So the wrist is biaxial. That means it can move about two axes. It can move about its bilateral, so sagittal plane motion, right? So we know that one already. Flexion, extension, get us in the fetal, out of fetal. Check that box. The new one is it can move in its frontal plane about an AP axis. We call those motions radial and ulnar deviation. We're going to teach you about what that means, the landmarks, not global, but local landmarks to look at. Radial and ulnar deviation, guys, can sometimes be confused with radial ulnar joint. So make sure when we talk about the radial ulnar joint, that is how the radius is going to rotate about the ulna. Radial and ulnar deviation is a way that the wrist can deviate towards the radius or the ulna. So sometimes that can be confusing, but they're in totally separate categories. This one is a joint itself. These words are joint motions at a different place, okay? So our wrist is going to have four movements and or positions that we got to look at. Flexion, extension, and then radial and ulnar deviation. I'm going to explain those to you later. Our elbow, remember when we talked about the subtalar and the ankle, how it's like a skateboard thing where it's in one apartment complex, but it's not the same apartment building? The analogy I use is that the ankle is on the top floor and the subtalar is underneath it, right? Here we have elbow and radial ulnar joint that are in the same apartment complex, meaning that the capsule and the synovium that encapsulates it are in the same, but instead of like being above and below, they're like side by side. They're neighbors side by side, but they're two separate joints. This is the radial ulnar joint. And again, I'm going to explain how to use the landmarks. This is the elbow. So elbow is how the ulna moves about the humerus to get you closer to fetal or further away from fetal, and that's it. It's a hinge joint, just like the door. There's no modified hinge like in the knee. It is just a pure hinge. The radial ulnar joint, how the radius wraps itself around the ulna, is what we call a pivot joint. No different than our atlas axis in our head. In other words, it's purely designed for spin, like a merry-go-round, purely designed for spinning. So elbow, uniaxial hinge, flexion and extension, in the fetal, out of fetal. Radial ulna, specialized pivot, meant for spin, meant for rotation. The two words we have for that is pronation and supination. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, if you've ever heard this before, forget about it. Do not learn supination is like a soup bowl. Hunt that concept, because I'm going to give you 1,000 examples where it's not. I'm going to teach you supination and pronation is as simple as going prone or going supine. Like, think about it. You know what supine is, laying on your back, and you know what prone is, laying on your tummy. So in anatomical position, the radius is facing forward or facing up. And when we have pronation, it's literally going prone. And when we have supination, it's literally going supine. But I can sure as heck make a soup bowl over my head, and that's actually pronated. So it has nothing to do with a global reference of a bowl facing the ceiling is what I'm trying to get to, okay? Is the radius wrapped or prone or unwrapped or supine? And I'm going to teach you how to see it and how to figure it out, okay? I'm just establishing our motions. The reason I'm putting all of these together, and I know it may seem like a lot, but when we move our radial ulna, our wrists, and our elbows, they happen a lot together when we do functional tasks. Like, I don't know, I speak with my hands. So a lot of times, elbow, radial ulna, and wrist are all kind of happening together. And shoulder, but we'll get to that once we put all the things together, right? So wrist, the wrist joint is where the carpals, more specifically the scaphoid and the lunate, that's not going to be on your test, but the proximal carpals articulate with the radius. Now watch this, how cool. You see this extra space, all of this extra space on here? The real articulation is happening here, not here and here. One of the ways we know that is if we're in anatomical position, look how much movement you have when you deviate your hand medially or to your ulna. That's a lot of deviation, right? Because you have all this extra space in here. The reason we have these bones not twisting, we don't want to twist it. You know, like you twist a balloon animal, how you blow up and then you twist a balloon animal? You guys know this. Our hands have so much nerve ratios, right? The ratio of nerve to fiber is out of this world to be able to do the fine, intricate details. Ton of nerves in here for us to do all those little intrinsic movements. What we don't want to do is have all that plumbing and wiring that crosses our wrists in the front, arteries, nerves, all those nerves, and twist it like a balloon animal. Does that make sense? Like, that just sounds like not a good day. We want to keep all the plumbing and the wiring lined up. And one of the ways we do that is keep the radius and the carpal bones lined up. Anterior and anterior. Anterior and anterior. We keep them lined up. We do not want to twist the wrist. That would be a very bad day. Okay? So the wrist does not twist. What twists is, again, our radial ulnar joint. So elbow, I'm going to check that off. Ulna, connecting to humerus. Flexion is going to get us more in the fetal. Extension is going to get us further away from fetal. Anatomical position for the elbow, we can say extended because I can't go any further than that. But that doesn't, you can't play that game for all the joints. But anatomical, extended, no problem. Flexion gets you more in the fetal. Extension gets you further away from fetal. Its neighbor in the same apartment complex, but not in the same apartment, the radial ulnar joint, the radius in anatomical position facing forward. This is how I explain radial ulnar joint motion. It's silly, it's ridiculous, but I don't know, it works. And we should all be 18 years old. So Ken is going to be my radius. Dude, Ken's the MVP of class, let me tell you. Ken does a lot of stuff. Ken is going to be my radius, okay? Ken, the head of the radius, head of Ken. In anatomical position, Ken is supine. Yes, he's standing upright, but supine meaning he's facing forward, he's facing anterior, okay? When I have pronation, the act of going prone, I'm literally going to roll Ken over, and Ken is going to wrap himself around the ulna. Now, his head stays in the same place. It's like if you were on a pillow and you rolled to hug like either a hugging pillow or a big stuffed animal, or in Ken's case, Barbie. I don't know, is that stuff? There's like a word for it we boomers use. Has something to do with a spoon. So if Ken rotates over the bed, his whole body can go from like one side to the other, but his head could stay on his pillow. Does that make sense? So that's what's happening when you do this. Think of your thumb as kind of being a foot, or think of your fingers as kind of being the feet in this analogy, okay? When I do this, I'm literally bringing a part that's laterally in anatomical position. My thumb is lateral and anatomical. True? I'm taking my thumb that's lateral and I'm flipping it over to the medial side of my arm. But the head of Ken, the head of the radius, is still lateral. The head doesn't come off. The head of the radius is like a clock. All it's doing is spinning. But the bone flips over to the other side. The head is still lateral, but everything that attaches to it flips over to the medial part of my arm. Let me put it another way. In anatomical position, all of my lateral structures line up. My lateral epicondyle of my humerus, my radial head, my thumb, all things lateral. Medial, my medial epicondyle, that bone, that big branchy kind of knobby bone where your ulnar nerve runs, that if you hit it, you hit your funny bone, right? That's medial, that's on the inside. Your pinky is medial on the inside. But when you rotate your radius, when you make it go prone, when you wrap it around the ulna, now your thumb is on the medial part of your arm. Does that make sense? That's a huge clue whether or not you're wrapped or prone or unwrapped or supine. It's a big clue. When you're supinated or supine, your lateral thumb will be lateral to your arm. And when you're prone, I call it the thumb rule. They only teach it here. When you're prone, your thumb is going to be medial to your humerus. That's how you know you're wrapped. Unwrapped, supine, wrapped, prone. Unwrapped, supine, wrapped, prone. Make sense? Now remember, it's a mirror effect. So Ken is unwrapped or supine here, but if he was looking at himself in a mirror, as he wrapped himself around, it would look like this. Lateral, lateral on both arms. Medial is now on the, lateral is now on the medial. What's great about this rule is it works because the wrist doesn't twist. Because I can't rotate my wrist and make my thumb go medial. You can't do it. So that's why this rule works, is because when I wrap my radius around the ulna, both my thumb and my lateral radial styloid both flip over. They have to. Let's do this experiment. Take your left hand and just kind of wrap it around your right and pronate and supinate and just try to feel the structure, feel the bone that's kind of moving in there. You feel that? You feel stuff happening. I'm not saying you have to feel it, but just you feel stuff happening. That should show you that it's not happening here. When I just move my wrist, I don't feel anything happening in my forearm. But when I do this, I literally feel bones wrapping and unwrapping in my forearm. Does that make sense? Yes, sir.
That why spiral fractures are common in the radial ulna?
Spiral fractures are common in the radial ulna for a couple of reasons. One is they're long bones. And when we land on our arm, we usually have compression and torsion happening. So it's like opening up a can of biscuits. You want to compress it and you want to twist it. And yep, so they're long bones, and that's one of the big factors in spiral fractures. And they're not made for that kind of force. Our legs, like our femurs and our tibias, they're made, they're thicker and they're denser, and the trabecula, they're made for that. Our arms aren't. We're not made to walk on our arms. So when we fall on an arm and it's not made to hold all that force, it puts itself in a weaker position and you have compression and twisting forces. Great question. So radial ulnar joint is super simple. I'm either wrapping or unwrapping. It can look a lot of different ways. So watch. Anatomical position, bilateral radial ulnar joint pronation, bilateral radial ulnar joint supination. I can flex my elbows, but my radial ulnar joint is still supine. I haven't done anything to my radial ulnar joint. Thumb rule, thumb is still lateral, still supine. Kin is still facing supine. Bilateral pronation, wrapped. Bilateral supination, unwrapped. Extended my wrist. I didn't do anything to my radial ulnar joint. Bilateral pronation, wrapped. Bilateral supination, unwrapped. Let me flex my shoulders. I didn't do anything to my radial ulnar joint. My thumb is still lateral. Bilateral pronation, wrapped. Bilateral supination, unwrapped. Yeah? The thumb rule. When the thumb is lateral, you're supine or unwrapped. And when your thumb is medial, you are prone or unwrapped. Let me show you a couple examples of why the soup bowl doesn't work, okay? Let's put our hands over our heads like this, okay? So palm down. Question, are you prone or are you supine? Don't answer it right away. Try to figure it out with the clues that I gave you. Is your thumb lateral or is your thumb medial? Now, I want you to be careful. I always want to teach you, sure, you can bring everything back to anatomical as long as you don't move the joint that I'm asking you about. These global references, the ceiling and the floor, so darn tempting. Your brain right now is like, well, my palm is facing the floor. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to bring your hand down and then move your radial ulnar joint to make the palm face forward. You just had radial ulnar joint motion. You didn't realize it. So do something more like this. I know my palm is touching my skull. It's still facing my skull. This is where I'm at. See what I'm saying? You don't even realize it, but while you come down, you actually pronate because you want to keep your darn palm facing the ground. That's a better way to do it. You see what I mean? This doesn't do it because you actually moved it. You moved your radial ulnar joint. Up here, you are in a supine position. Your thumb is lateral. But if you go by the silly soup bowl rule, you would think that you were prone. Does that make sense? And I know what you're thinking, dude, when am I ever going to do this on my head? You do a lot of stuff over your head. You do plenty of things over your head. And so we can't use this rule. we use another rule. Instead of supine soup bowl, just think about what it means to go prone or go supine. The act of going prone, going face down, the act of going supine, face forward, or in anatomical position, the act of rotating face back or face forward. That's what pronation and supination means. That would be, you'd be prone. So the act of going from here to here is pronation. So watch. Pronation, supination. Pronation, supination. Pronation, supination. Pronation, supination. Pronation, supination. Pronation, supination. And again, can it be tricky? Sure. That's why I'm giving you local landmarks to help us figure it out. When I'm up here, all you got to do is follow the thumb. It's lateral. It's the lateral part of my arm. I have to be supine. That's the medial part of my arm. I have to be prone. It's that simple. That simple. All right. How about this one? Start. We're going to start in anatomical. I start in this position. So I'm going to mirror you guys just to make sure we're on the same page. Okay. And I'm going to do this. First of all, did the radioulnar joints both do the same thing? Like they might look like it, right? But they're mirrors of each other. If you had a mirror and one did one and the mirror did something else, that mirror is possessed. Run from that mirror. Something's about to get you. The mentor or something. All right. Start, finish. Start. So how I would do it is I don't memorize any stuff because again, I try not to assume. Is my left radial ulnar joint wrapped or unwrapped? Is my thumb medial or lateral? That's what proves to me the position that I'm in. That's my start. And then I go to my finish. And then I say, well, am I wrapped or unwrapped? Because again, it may not be the radial ulnar joint. I might just move my wrist. But in this case, I'm moving my radial ulnar joint. So we analyze motion joint by joint. I don't want to tackle both of them at the same time. I want to say, okay, left, let's start with you. Where are you at? Where did you go? How did you have to move to get there? Where am I at? Is my left wrapped or unwrapped? Good. Has nothing to do with my wrist. Has nothing to do with my elbow. My thumb is medial. I am prone. I am pronated. Radial ulnar joint has nothing to do with my wrist. Has nothing to do with my elbow. I'm lateral. I'm now supine. I had to have supination to get there. Does that make sense? Left radial ulnar joint supination. And there's no guessing. You figure it out. This is where I started. This is where I went. This is how I had to move to get there. Oh, can we assume? I'm just messing with you. Maybe we can't. Go ahead.
I can feel right here that like there's no pulling on this one, so I would assume this is supinated, and this one I can feel the wrap. So
That's not bad. It's just always double check. Just always double check, right? Always double check. But it should make sense. When you pronate, you're stretching certain things, right? You're kind of spiraling across. So that's not bad, but I would always just kind of reinforce your thought by just making sure that you're, because what may happen is we may have other joints in other positions that might create a stretch. So I just don't want you to have a stretch because of my wrist position and you give that credit to the radiologist. So I'm not saying that's not a logical thing, but just to double check, make sure we're prone or supine, so that way we don't get trapped with some other stretch that might be happening in some other joint. Good stuff. Let's do the right. Is my right prone or supine? Good. Lateral. Medial. I wrapped. I went prone. Pronation. So I had left radial ulnar joint supination, and I had right radial ulnar joint pronation. free sound effects. 7:30. Good? All right, how about this one? Let's incorporate wrist. I'm not going to give you, I'm going to save the deviations for Monday, but you guys should know wrist flexion and wrist extension after the first test. Let's do something like this. Start, finish. Start, finish. It's quick, huh? Practice it for 20 years. Start, finish. Open-ended question. Identify what had significant motion and where was the significant motion. Give it some thought. If you're comfortable, discuss it with a neighbor. We analyze motion joint by joint. I'll give you a hint. More than one joint had significant motion, okay? Hi, Mom. She watches all my videos. I'm joking. She don't care about them. All right. We analyze motion joint by joint. Do y'all want to start off with a wrist conversation? Or no, that's not fair. Where were the significant motions happening at? Wrist and radial. Awesome. So again, we need to have a wrist conversation first or a radial joint conversation first. Which one would y'all like to have first? We don't want to do them at the same time. That's the lesson I'm trying to teach you. We don't want to combine. Radial, perfect. That's a great one. Radial ulna. Thumb side, lateral. I'm unwrapped. My radial ulna joint is supine. The fact that, think of it like this, Ken is supine whether or not he bends his knees or not. None of that matters. So in other words, I'm supine whether or not I flex or extend my wrist. I'm supine whether or not I flex or extend my elbow. It doesn't matter. The only thing that's going to affect Ken rotating prone or rotating supine is literally if that bone wraps or unwraps. So Ken is just as much supine. Make sense? He's just in an upside down chair right now. You know those recliners, those things you flip over to get the blood to your head. So thumb is lateral. That proves that I'm unwrapped. I'm in a supine position. Just radial ulnar joint. Now my thumb is medial. The only way that can happen is if I had pronation. So from here to there, radial ulnar joint pronation. Are we good? Any questions? Okay. Now what about our wrist? What position did I start at with my wrist? Flexed or extended? Extended. That's okay. That's why we practice. We ended flexed. You're right. I think you just answered where did I end? It's okay. We started out extended, furthest from fetal, but we ended flexed. So what motion did I have to have at my wrist to get there? Well, if I started extended, perfect. And this is why we practice, because like these words can be so confusing, like extension to get to that starting position. But in terms of what I asked you guys before and after, I had to have flexion. This is what happened in sequence. I did it simultaneously, but this is what happened in sequence. So simultaneously, you saw this. But in reality, I did these two things together. Or I could do it like this. It's just that I did them at the same time. No different than when we threw the jab. Elbow extension and shoulder horizontal adduction, if you want to put it that way. If I did them in sequence, it would look silly. But when you do them together, no different. This and this done at the same time looks like this. And the point is that because so many things don't look traditional, I mean, this doesn't look like traditional wrist flexion. Bloop, 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 bloop. So what tools are you guys going to have to be able to identify that that was wrist flexion? That's what I'm giving you. The tools to be able to say, well, it may not look like it flexed, but it had to. Because I'm in an extended position, and now I'm in a flex position. And unless you're Hufflepuff, you have to have flexion to get there. Make sense? So this would be supination and extension, pronation and flexion. Cool? All right. How about another one? Everybody, if you're willing and able, I think this is going to be a good lesson. Stand up. All right, it's going to be fun. Anatomical position. Okay. What I'd like for you to do is note how in anatomical position your palms are facing forward. Cool. Now I would like for you to raise your hands over your head and make your palms stay facing forward. And then I want you to tell me, yes or no, did your radial ulnar joints have motion? I'm not even asking you what, just yes or no. Did they? That's the question. Start. Finish. I see a lot of 8 a.m. hamsters just this is what's great about learning. Heck yeah, it's a trick question. Human motion is tricky. Human motion is tricky. All right, let me ask y'all this. Does Superman fly in a supine position or in a prone position? Like when he's flying, okay? All right. So if I'm here and I do this, Superman's not going to fly like this, right? True? That's cool. So watch. I go here and I do this. Well, now Superman can fly. So did I have radial ulnar joint motion? Yeah. I'll explain the illusion. It's not magic, I promise. That's why I wore the Hufflepuff thing today. Yeah. It doesn't feel like it, huh? All right, y'all have a seat. Let me explain it to you. You feel like you're getting your money's worth with this class? Sorcery. What is this wizardry? I'm so glad I didn't teach anatomical kinesiology during the Salem witch era. Like I'd be doomed. I'd be doomed. I'd be burned. All right, guys, check this out. If Ken was a spoon, like literally a spoon. So let's say his feet are the scoop. Okay. If I take a spoon and I just rotate it sagittally, wouldn't it be facing the other way? Like you would see the back of the spoon. Okay. All right. Now for the shoulder, I'm going to do it more like this, where the head of the shoulder is here, but you still see the front of the spoon. If I do this only to the spoon, you're going to see the back of the spoon. Okay. We also established that frontal abduction and external rotation get us to the same place as flexion alone. Okay, so check this out. Check this out. Let's see if I can do this. I have not moved my arms at all. Right now, I'm rotating my shoulders, but I haven't moved my arms. True? Right, freeze. Come back up. When you see the back of the spoon? How, if I didn't want to show the back of the spoon, if I wanted to keep showing the front of the spoon, as I do this, wouldn't I want to pronate? Now, sagittally, it's easy to see. Frontally, it's not because it's subtle. It's subtle. It's happening gradually. As I move my shoulders, if I do not pronate, what you'll see is this. If you're willing and able, you don't even have to stand up. Purposefully keep your thumbs lateral and watch how, if you keep your thumbs lateral, you'll see the back of your hand. Try to keep your thumbs lateral. There you go. In order to keep your hand facing forward, you're going to gradually pronate. It's subtle, it's gradual. You're going to gradually pronate, and that pronation is happening with the shoulder motion, and that's why you don't see it. It's freaky, huh? Just a little bit. Just a little bit. But that's why it's important to do thumb rules, right? You could gradually, hopefully see, I'm lateral, I'm lateral, I'm lateral, I'm lateral, I'm starting to pronate, I'm starting to pronate, I'm starting to pronate, and that's what pronate. It's gradual. It's happening at the same time, in other words. That's why I did this one first. It's not going then this. It's happening at the same time, so it's much harder to see. Okay? So that's why we can use our thumb rule and say, where did I start? Where did I finish? So my motion is proven, not guessed. I started supine, but when I look at how I finished, my thumb is now medial. Even though I may not have felt it or seen it, I had to have pronation. Does that make sense? However you want to look at it. Any questions so far? About if, let's see, 12 more minutes. What about if I did something like this, okay? If I start here, Ken is fully supine, right, facing forward. Ken is fully prone, facing back or down. There is a common position. How many of you sleep on your back, like facing forward? How many of you sleep on your tummy? How many of you sleep on your side? How many are like me, and we all over the place? It's long yacht, and you never know what you're gonna get. My wife has like the what's the Great Wall of China built between us, because I'm like flopping around all over the place. So there is a functional position of halfway. It's like sleeping on your side. Fully supine, Ken is supine. Fully prone, Ken is fully prone. But midway is like sleeping on your side, and we call this position semi-prone. Semi-pronated. It's a very functional position. It's a functional position of grip. We don't grip everything fully supine, and we don't grip everything fully prone. We grip a lot of things halfway, like sleeping on your side. I'll teach you a rule to see semi-prone, but first of all, why do you think it's called semi-prone and not semi-supine? Yeah, well, because anatomical position is supine, right? So to get to this halfway position, you have to have pronation, or you have to be pronated. Remember, Your position is based off of anatomical. Absolutely, absolutely. Because anatomical is not pronated. Because anatomical is supinated, any position past your prone. It's like the elbow. Elbow in anatomical is extended, so technically, even if it's 5 degrees, you're flexed. Flex, 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 flex. Even when I'm extending, I'm still flexed because it's relative to where did I start in anatomical. So it's the same. Anatomical position, you're all the way supinated. You can't go any further. So any amount of pronation, you're pronated. So that's why this is called semi-pronated. It's basically on your side. It's halfway. It's like 90 degrees to a full wrap. Your landmark for a semi-pronated position, what's in the middle of your medial and lateral epicondyles? Bicep is a great landmark for halfway. You're not lateral, you're not medial, you're halfway. Make sense? Bicep, great landmark for being halfway. Not lateral, not medial, you're sleeping on your side. Okay? Here's also on the test. On the test, this is the trick or the technique I'd like for you to use. I'm either going to ask you, I'll ask you motions, but in terms of position, I'm going to ask, are you supinated fully? Are you pronated fully? In other words, are you all the way unwrapped? Are you all the way wrapped? And then I'm going to ask you a semi question. And semi could be tricky because, maybe you could be, within a little window. But think about it. If you're halfway, if you're sleeping on your side, that means you have the ability to unwrap or wrap. Does that make sense? If you're fully unwrapped, you can't unwrap anymore. And if you're fully wrapped, you can't wrap anymore. So somewhere in the middle, you have the ability to unwrap, or to go supine, or go prone. Okay? I'm going to give you a question like you would have on the test right now. Let's go hands over the heart like we're saying the Pledge of Allegiance in elementary school, right? Elbow down, because I don't know who does it like this. Maybe I would do it. I'm weird. So in this position, your logic is, okay, I see the back of my hand. If I extend, then I'm going to see the front of my hand and I'm supine. But remember, a lot of times people move things while they're coming back down or up because it's convenient. So let's ask ourselves this. From this position, am I able to unwrap? Yeah. From this position, am I able to wrap? Yeah. So wouldn't I be kind of semi? And this is how I could prove it. Watch this. Does that make sense? So one cool trick to find out if you're somewhat halfway is just to say, well, from this position, can I supinate or can I pronate? And if you can have significant motion in either direction, it means you must be kind of in the middle. Cool. On Monday, we're going to do some fun ones like this. You remember that? Guys, a radial ulnar joint exists so that you can keep your hands and put them in a functional position of infinitely many points in space. So the ability to reposition your entire palm, and again, not balloon twist nerves and vessels at the wrist. So between your radial ulnar joint and your shoulder, and I'm going to teach you how to separate what's shoulder and what's radial ulnar, but you get a whole 360 degrees of function here. Radial ulnar, shoulder, that's huge for being able to grab, scratch, work, catch. Being able to put those fingers and palms in a full circle of position and motion. Very useful to we humans. I like it a lot. All right, last one. What if you scratched your back? Speaking of scratch your back, let's say we scratch our back with our right or our left. Let's see if we can identify what position our radial ulnar joint in would be in mostly. Do the thumb rule. Is the thumb mostly lateral or mostly medial? Mostly lateral. So think of it like this. If you were back here and you had pronation, you'd be here. Right? Because again, this is how Superman flies. You see now why Campbell doesn't teach you soup bowls, right? But what we can do is use landmarks. We can use local references. What's great about local references, outside of a dislocation or a bad day, they always check out. They always work. Any questions? All right, thank y'all for being an awesome class. Y'all have a safe weekend. Monday. I'll go in the lab and come up with some more practice.